Apollo and the gods watch the dragging, which goes on and on. Achilles does this frequently, it seems, dragging him now more around the funeral site of his friend Patroclus. And the gods are, the gods are no great moral arbiters, but when you go too far for them, that's saying something. And they're saying, that's enough. So Apollo, where'd it go? Apollo warded off from Hector's flesh all disfigurement, pitying, there's that word again, pitying the mortal man, dead though he was, and covered him wholly round with golden aegis, blah, 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 blah. He protects the body from further damage, further desecration. That does not end the dragging. Achilles continues to drag Hector's body around, presumably seeing that nothing seems to be happening. If anything, he's getting cleaner. But he keeps going. Around and around and around and around. To no effect. It's pointless. It's fruitless. It's meaningless. All it does is consume him further in rage, with no outcome. There's no escaping it. So the gods go a little bit further and instigate, let's say, that's what they tend to do, Priam to go and make a direct appeal to Achilles. Priam, you got to do this. Load up a cart full of ransom, treasure, and go and essentially buy back the corpse of your son. There's a nice little moment where Priam, also a very connected person, 50 kids, but, has a very strong wife, whom he goes to and says, the gods came to me with this suggestion. Gods make a suggestion. You generally want to stick with it. But what do you think, dear? And she tells him, I think this is a bad idea. You're going to end up dead. You're going to go and talk to that monster who killed our son. And you're expecting that, he'll be okay with this little drop-in. And Priam, husbands and wives, Priam, having gone and solicited his wife's opinion, saying, you tell me what you should do, or what I should do. He then quickly dispels her suggestion and says, well, I'm going anyway. He's a guy. He goes, and the god Hermes, who is a messenger god, but also a protector of travelers. All of the Greek gods have many hats to wear. They're all multitaskers. And they sneak him in. And you have this image of this old man in deep, deep sorrow. And they specify, like, the kind of ritualistic quality of that. He's not just sad, but he's been smearing himself with dung. Poop, to you and me. Which is an old ritualistic tradition to symbolize mourning. He had been wallowing around in filth and practicing the cultic rituals of morning. And he's utterly broken. But he goes anyway, and he reaches out. He relies, because Hermes doesn't say, well, we squared it off with Achilles, you can go in there and you're going to have this deal. Hermes only offers, well, I can get you into the tent. I can put you in front of Achilles. What happens after there? Well, who knows. He makes that step. He trusts. He assumes, or he gambles, that Achilles will act as an honorable member of society and respect this outreach. And it's such a fraught moment because we've seen Achilles can get a little nuts. He can fly off the handle. He is not a creature of moderation, that great Greek value. So you have this little old man. You got to picture him, long beard, gray, somewhat shriveled perhaps even, obviously filthy, going and facing his son's killer. He enters humbly. There's a long build up to the meeting, but he enters showing great humility. And in supplication, Priam addressed him. Remember your father, godlike Achilles, the same age as I, on the ruinous threshold of old age, and perhaps those who dwell around surround him and bear hard upon him, nor is there anyone to ward off harm and destruction. He enters, and you can say that this is strategic on his part, or maybe it's the poet being a little strategic, recalling Achilles' father. Again, Achilles doesn't have a lot of connections in this world. He is all alone at this moment. When Priam comes in, he has a couple of attendants, but they're generally away. They're always somewhere else. And he makes his appeal. 50 were my sons when the sons of Achaeans came. 19 were born to me from the womb of the same mother. Oif. And the rest the women in my palace bore to me. We won't look into that. Of these furious Ares, the god of war, has made slack the knees of many. I have lost a lot of my children. Revere the gods, Achilles, and have pity on me. Remember your father. He's emphasizing these points. It creates a little bit of perhaps empathy for him. He is reminding, revere the gods, submit to all the social niceties, don't get too high on your horse, moderation, humility, avoid hubris, that other Greek nasty word, but bend to social agreements. We are, even you, at least partly human. So he spoke, and he stirred in the other a yearning to weep for his own father. Here, You show he's got a little bit of a soft spot for his dad. His father is a great hero. But also, you have Priam standing right in front of him, talking about how I've lost many of my sons, and you killed my favorite, my boy, my golden child. And Achilles' perspective is, oh yeah, well that makes me think about my own dad. He's fine, he's a rich guy living back in Greece, and it's sad that I can't be with him. Maybe I'll send him a card. It's a little selfish, but it does show that opening, that connection. It is not one thing or the other. It is not a sentimental moment, and it's not an entirely selfish moment either. It's in between. Victoria, were you going to say something?
Yeah. What line do you want?
Right now, I think I just read like line 507 or something like that. Jumping down like 512, but when godlike Achilles had taken his fill of lamentation, and the yearning had gone from his breast and very limbs, he rose suddenly from his seat and raised the old man by the hand, pitying his gray beard and gray head. He's connecting with this broken old man. He's reaching out, literally taking him by the hand. Poor soul, surely you have endured much evil in your heart. How did you dare to go to the Achaean ships alone into the sight of a man who killed your many and your noble sons? Your heart is iron. He's learning to respect this man. Recognizing a bravery and an integrity in another human being that he's been more or less assuming was his own thing. Oh, well, I'm the bravest. I'm the greatest of the Greek soldiers, so, nobody else can compare to me. But now he's thinking about, well, this broken down old man just, even with a God's help, it took a lot of guts to come in here. Your heart is iron, but come and seat yourself upon the chair, and let us leave these sorrows lying undisturbed within our hearts, grieving though we are. For there is no profit in grief that numbs the heart. For thus have the gods spun the thread of destiny for wretched mortals, that we live in sorrow, and they themselves, the gods, are free from care. For 2 urns lie stored in the floor of Zeus, full of such gifts as he gives, one of evil, the other of good. And here you see the contrast of evil and good, and the idea of the god just sort of dispensing willy-nilly one or the other. Compare that to the god of the relative contemporaries, just neighboring village, the Hebrews, who say everything God does is good. Here you have a God who's a little good, a little evil, a little good. Mix it up. Then old Priam, like a god, answered him. Do not have me sit upon a chair, God-cherished one, while Hector lies in your shelters unburied, but quick as you can, release him, so that I may see him in my eyes, and you accept the many gifts of ransom which we have brought for you. He has a purpose. He's not there just to visit. For an old man, he's focused. He's not going to sit there and kibitz. And have enjoyment of them, and may you return to your, what's that word? Anyone? Anyone? Return to your fatherland. You could choose any word in the world. Chose fatherland. Again, Translation, always slippery, but I'm gonna pin my hopes on that. I'll go and I'll check the Greek later. Always bringing up fathers and sons and family connections. Priam's a wily old guy. He knows how to make a point. Provoke me no further, old man, for I am myself minded to release Hector to you. From Zeus my mother came to me as messenger, she who bore me, daughter of the old man of the sea. I recognize, Priam, in my mind, and it does not escape me, that some one of the gods led you to the Achaeans' swift ships. He's saying, I know that I'm not the only one with a god on my side. Somebody is backing you, too. He is peering through the situation and understanding the power politics at play here. Therefore, do not now stir my heart further in its sorrows, lest, old man, I do not spare even yourself within my shelter, suppliant though you are. So he hasn't really let go of that rage thing just yet. He's having a nice moment with him. But when Priam starts to push him on what he really wants, Achilles will shut him down. Thus he spoke, and the old man was afraid and obeyed his word. And the son of Peleus, like a lion, always the animal, sprang out the door of the shelter, and he goes outside and he speaks to his underling and says, all right, look, take the body, clean it up, don't let anyone see. Keep it out of sight of Priam, certainly we don't want to upset him further, which is a nice little moment of empathy. This is the same guy who just a couple of days earlier was dragging the corpse around the city in front of his parents and family and friends. And now he's saying, well, the old man doesn't need to see this. It's the stirrings of empathy, that sense that, well, Priam and I kind of just had a moment. Godlike Achilles went back to his shelter and took his seat on the richly wrought chair from which he had risen against the far wall and spoke his words to Sion. Your son has been released to you, old man, as you bade, and lies upon the bier. And with the dawn's appearance you will see yourself when you take him. But now let us not forget our supper. He is suggesting they have a meal together. Now, this is significant on a couple of levels. Number one, it keeps Priam busy so that, the body can get sort of cleaned up and he's not going to go outside the tent. If Priam had said, nope, not hungry, I had a little bite on the road, I want to get the body and go, that would have been awkward. But the rules of hospitality, of Xenia, are starting to click in. Achilles is bending to those customs. He is reinserting himself into common humanity. Let us not forget our supper. And then he goes into this long story of Niobe I really don't care about. But come, let us too, illustrious old sir, take thought of food. For you may weep for your dear son again when you have brought him to Ilion. He will be the cause of many tears. He recognizes also in this that having a meal is a recognition of human limitations, human needs. People need to eat. And he sees this old man who we find out soon enough hasn't eaten anything in a couple of days. And he says, you look like hell, pal. Let's let's get you some food. So he has his attendants come in and cook. Achilles very dramatically grabs a knife and like kills a sheep right in front of them. Ancient world, what are you gonna do? Significantly, and again, I noticed this in rereading it just recently, and I want to go check the Greek, but when they actually bring in the food, it never says Achilles ate. It says Achilles distributed the meat, and they reached out their hands, I'm talking about presumably Priam and some of Achilles' like attendants. They reached out their hands to the good things set ready before them, and when they had put away desire for eating and drinking, then did Priam, son of Dardanus, look in wonder at Achilles, how massive he was. We'll get to that in a second. But it never actually says Achilles ate with Priam. It's leaning on pronouns, which may or may not exist in the original. Chances are it was more an implication of verb form. But it's significant because Achilles is not really human. He distributes the meat, but he can't partake. He's always separate, always different, never quite able to join in. He was like a god to look upon. And Achilles looked in wonder at Dardanian Priam, gazing at his noble face, listening to his words. So you have this image of, what is your deal, old man? You came here, I killed your son in front of you. And you're coming in here, it shows guts, but it's also humility. You're asking this very gently for a little human consideration. You're reaching out to me for some evidence of compassion, some evidence of a shared understanding of our values. And you can just see him staring at the old man as he eats. As Priam had been staring at him. Then did Priam, son of Dardanus, look in wonder at Achilles, how massive he was, what kind of man, for he was like a god to look upon. They're both just sitting there, looking at one another, connected, without words. And when they had had their full of looking upon each other, then old Priam, the godlike, addressed Achilles first. Let me go to bed now quickly, God-cherished one, so that we may have solace when we lie down beneath sweet sleep. For not yet have my eyes closed beneath my lid from the time my son lost his life at your hands, but always I groaned in lament and brooded on my sorrows without measure. Another sense of human limitations. Priam didn't eat or sleep since his son had been killed. And he's, hitting that wall. He can't go any further. Just like Hector could not keep running because, your lungs start to explode. Priam is there. He is merely human. Another contrast. Then bantering Achilles of the swift feet addressed Priam, "Sleep outside, old friend, for fear one of the Achaean leaders comes suddenly upon us here, who forever devise their counsels beside me, as is right and proper." He's thinking about Priam's safety. He's considering consequences also, significantly. One of Achilles' big problems throughout that arguably started the whole kerfuffle was consequences. Achilles flew into a rage without thinking, well, what really comes next? Where does this lead? Here, he's thinking, well, no, if some of the Greeks come upon you in here, it'll be bad. So let's just try and work around that. Consequences. Human consequences in the real world, not just acting selfishly out of your own rage. But come and tell me this and relate it exactly. How many days do you desire to give funeral rites to shining Hector? For so long I will wait and hold back the army. And here again we have funeral rites. And he says, how much time do you need? Which is, I find quite astounding. The generosity of that. He's not working on his timetable anymore. He's not saying, well, I had my rest earlier when I was just sitting around, and then I came and I kicked a whole bunch of ass, and I'm feeling pretty good on that, and I want to keep pressing my advantage. And I am, we're going to win. We're going to win the war. We know this. The gods told us. So let's get to the chase. Let's get to it. No. He's making the space for Priam and the entire city of Troy to honor their dead, to practice their social customs, to engage in grief, which he was kind of deriding just a minute before, saying grief comes to nothing. He's saying, no, you can have the time. And he holds back the Greek army. And you get this long, not too long, procession of grief. We get speeches from Hector's mom, his wife, from Helen of Troy, and even a short one from Priam. All the people representing the connections in Hector's life. And you get this description of the entire city coming together to mourn him, to have a funeral, to enact customs of their society. And they all gather together and work together to honor this great hero. And because of Achilles, Achilles has the Greeks participate by not launching an attack. So it is an image almost completely wordless after a while. There are no more speeches after a little while, and it just becomes the ritual, the funeral, the measurable, wordless acts. For 9 days they brought immense piles of timber, and when at length the 10th dawn showed, bringing light to mortals, then shedding tears, they carried forth bold Hector. On top of the very pyre they placed his body, and then it flung the fire. I like how, again, the pronoun they, it's everybody together. Everybody is coming together. And when dawn born on the morning showed forth her fingers of rosy light, then around the pyre of illustrious Hector the people gathered, always emphasizing that, First they extinguished the burning fire with dark gleaming wine entirely, all that retained the fire's strength, and then his brothers and his comrades picked out his white bones as they wept, and the swelling tears fell from their cheeks, and taking the bones they placed them in a golden box and covered them round with soft purple cloth. Again, there are no names in this, no individuals. It's the entire city, the entire culture joining in this effort. Lightly they heaped up the burial mound. Lookouts were set all around, lest the strong grieved Achaeans should attack before. And when they had piled up the mound, they started back. Then, having come together, they duly gave a glorious feast in the house of Priam, king nurtured by Zeus. Thus they tended the funeral of Hector, breaker of horses. They are practicing a kind of social observance. It's a kind of religious piety, but it is clearly more about everybody coming together. And significantly, they come together and they're mourning, but there's always that hint. There's always that lingering threat. Lest the strong grieved Achaeans should attack. In this moment where they are honoring their dead, in this somewhat, again, beautiful human moment, spiritual moment, underneath it, as they're enacting this superficial social custom, there is that threat, that lurking danger of violence that could break out at any time. Because they can never give themselves over one way or the other. They cannot grieve without bearing in mind that something else is in this. There is no such thing as pure emotion in one direction or the other. It's always a mix. They're conscious of this. They have no choice but to be. In this barbaric world, violence can break out at any time. But I would argue the story of Achilles is about breaking out of that, because Achilles learns of sorts that the violence leads nowhere. The violence is just an endless cycle of suffering and misery, and it accomplishes nothing. But what really matters is forging a connection with one another. What really matters is caring about another human being, reaching out and connecting. Because that's what breaks them out of the cycle of violence. That ability to say, enough. Rage gets us nowhere. Lead to kindness, in a sense. Now, one more point. This is all great within the world of the poem. The Greeks used this. Now, first of all, remember all the effort it takes to remember a poem this long. The Greeks used this and protected this for centuries. At the time, Greece was struggling with its own barbaric tendencies. City-states were evolving as the poem was coming into being. People were coming together and deciding whether or not, do we want to be warlike tribes anymore? Do we want to just live on that nice edge between death, destruction, and some appearance of peace? Or can we reach out, break through the cycle of violence? Can we learn to get along? And this poem promotes that. the leaders of the Greek civilization who were so protecting this poem and telling the story over and over and over and over and over again were doing so because it promotes the values of their civilization. It gives them the constant refrain that fighting is just killing us. We need to become civilized. We can all swagger around about our barbarian heroic deeds, but heroes have no place in a civilized world. Achilles is a great hero. He's a great hero because he is really, really good at killing. What place does that have in a world where we're all just trying to live together? You can admire it. You can tell stories about it. But do you really want to emulate it? So I would argue that this poem is about a wake-up call to an incipient civilization struggling to leave behind violence and barbarity. Maybe one day we will.